Chapter R, an anthology of RNTBTI. The problem: I have sent the following letter, with variations, to certain famous contemporaries here and abroad for whose intelligence I have high regard. New York, July 15, 1931. Will you interrupt your work for a moment and play the game of philosophy with me? I am attempting to face a question which our generation, perhaps more than any, seems always ready to ask and never able to answer: what is the meaning or worth of human life? Heretofore this question has been dealt with chiefly by theorists, from McNaughton and Lao Tse to Bergson and Spengler. The result has been a kind of intellectual suicide. Thought, by its very development, seems to have destroyed the value and significance of life. The growth and spread of knowledge, for which so many idealists and reformers prayed, has resulted in a disillusionment which has almost broken the spirit of our race. Astronomers have told us that human affairs constitute but a moment in the trajectory of a star. Geologists have told us that civilization is but a precarious interlude between ice ages. Biologists have told us that all life is war, a struggle for existence among individuals, groups, nations, alliances, and species. Historians have told us that progress is a delusion, whose glory ends in inevitable decay. Psychologists have told us that the will and the self are the helpless instruments of heredity and environment, and that the once incorruptible soul is but a transient incandescence of the brain. The Industrial Revolution has destroyed the home, and the discovery of contraceptives is destroying the family, the old morality, and perhaps, through the sterility of the intelligent, the race. Love is analyzed into a physical congestion, and marriage becomes a temporary physiological convenience slightly superior to promiscuity. Democracy has degenerated into such corruption as only Milo's Rome knew, and our youthful dreams of a sciolist utopia disappear as we see, day after day, the inexhaustible acquisitiveness of men. Every invention strengthens the strong and weakens the weak. Every new mechanism displaces men, and multiplies the horrors of war. Who was once the consolation of our brief life, and our refuge in bereavement and suffering, has apparently vanished from the scene. No telescope, no microscope discovers him. Life has in that total irrespective which is philosophy, a fitful pullulation of human insects on the earth, a planetary eczema that may be cured. Nothing is certain in it except defeat and death, a sleep from which, it seems, there is no awakening. We are driven to conclude that the greatest mistake in human history was the discovery of truth. It has not made us free, except from delusions that comforted us and restraints that preserved us. It has not made us happy, for truth is not and did not deserve to so passionately chased. As we on it now, we wonder why we hurried so to find it. For it has taken from us every reason for existence except the moment's pleasure and tomorrow's trivial H0f. This is the past to which science and philosophy have brought us. I, who have loved philosophy for many years, now turn back to life itself, and ask you, as one who has lived as well as thought, to help me understand. Perhaps the verdict of those who have lived is different from that of those who have merely thought. Spare MC a moment to tell me, what Reneanning life has for Y06, Revayat going. I chat help if any religion gives you, got the sources of your inspiration and your rigi, had is the goal or motive force of your toy. Here you find your consolations and your where, in the last resort, your treasure lies. Write briefly if you must, write at length and at leisure if you possibly can, for every word from you will be precious to me. Sincerely yours, Will Durant. I would not have this letter taken as expressing very accurately my own conclusions on the meaning of our existence. I cannot find it in my nature to be so despondent. But I wished to confront at the outset the bitterest possibilities, to load the dice against my own desires, and to put the problem in such a way as to guard against the superficial optimism with which men are wont to turn aside the profounder issues of life. And since no one deserves to believe unless he has served an apprenticeship of doubt, I provokes to state at some length the case against the worth and significance of human affairs. Later we shall consider the replies which have come to this letter from various nations and continents, and in the sequel I to answer the question for myself with whatever sincerity a half-century of life has left me in the face of the greatest of all temptations to lie. 11. Religion, the natural condition of humanity, and even of philosophers, is hope. Great religions arise and flourish out of the need men feel to believe in their worth and destiny, and great civilizations have normally rested upon these inspiriting religions. Where such a faith, after supporting men for centuries, begins to weaken, life narrows down from a spiritual drama to a logical episode, it sacrifices the dignity conferred by a destiny endless in time, and shrinks to a strange interlude between a ridiculous birth and an annihilating death. Reduced to a microscopic triviality by the perspective of science, the informed individual loses belief in himself and his race, and enterprises of great pith and moment, which once aroused his effort and admiration, awaken in him only skepticism and scorn. Faith and hope disappear, doubt and despair are the order of the day. This is the essential diagnosis of our time. It is not merely the war of 1914 that has plunged us into pessimism, much less the economic depression of these recent years. We have to do here with something far deeper than a temporary diminution of our wealth, or even the death of men. It is not our homes and our treasuries that are empty, it is our hearts. It seems impossible any longer to believe in THC per man greatness of man, or to give life a meaning that cannot be annulled by death. We move into an age of spiritual exhaustion and despondency like that which hungered for the birth of Christ. Ill science when the 18th century laid the foundations of the 19th, it staked everything upon one idea: the replacement of theology with science. Give science, and there would be wealth, which would make men happy. Given science, and there would soon be truth, which would make men free. Universal education would spread the findings of science, liberate men from superstition, and make them fit for democracy. A century of such universal schooling, Bentham predicted, would solve all major problems, and bring utopia. There is no limit to the progress of mankind, said Condorcet, except the duration of the globe upon which it is placed. The young are fortunate, said Voltaire, for they will see great things. They did. They saw the Revolution and the Terror, Waterloo and 48, Balaclava and Gettysburg, Dan and Mukden, Armageddon and Lenin. They saw the growth and triumph of the sciences, of biology with Darwin, of physics with Faraday, of chemistry with Dalton, of astronomy with Laplace, of medicine with Pasteur, of mathematics with Einstein. All the H0Fs of the Enlightenment were realized, science was free, and was remaking the world. But while the technicians were using science to transform the earth, philosophers were using it to transform the universe. Slowly, as one science after another rooted its findings, a picture was unfolded of universal struggle and death, and decade by decade the optimism of the 19th century yielded to the pessimism of the astronomers reported that the Earth, which had the a stole of God and the home of the atoning Christ, was a minor planet circling about a minor sun, that it had had its birth in a violent disruption, and would end in collision and conflagration, leaving not a shadow of man's work to tell his tale. Any geologists reported that life was tolerated transiently upon the earth at the pleasure of ice and heat, at the mercy of falling lava and failing rain, that xians and mountains were engaged in a perpetual warfare of encroachment and corrosion, and alternating victory, that great continents had been destroyed by earthquakes and would be again. The paleontologists reported that 1 million species of animals had lived on the earth for a paltry eon or two and had disappeared without leaving anything more than a few stains and imprints in the rocks. The biologists reported that all life lives at the expense of other life, that big things cat little things and are eaten in turn, that strong organisms use and abuse weak organisms in 100,000 ways forever, that the ability to kill is the ultimate test of survival, that reproduction is suicide, and that love is the prelude to replacement and death. Here, as example and symbol of all life, is my dog Wolf, who owes her existence to the olfactory attractiveness of her police dog mother to her colic sire. She eats greedily and drinks abstemiously, she is a teetotaler, and despite the pressure of current fashions refuses all alcoholic beverages. She chases whatever we throw, takes the coziest seats in the house, receives our affection as a matter of course, falls into a rut, and lures to our porch 100 lovers. All night long our neighbor's Airedale waits at our and moans like a troubadour. What but bad PCRTRY is the difference between this and love? Later Lady Wolf, after much commotion, suffering, and mute inquiries as to the sense and meaning of it all, litters the house with pups. She suckles them patiently, protects them growlingly against all danger, and nearly dies of their simultaneous voracity. At times she laps up milk from a bowl while her babies tug at her breasts, and then the apparently aimless circularity of life leaps to the eye. One by one the pups are given away. Wolf looks for them for a day, and then forgets them. The final pup exploits and maltreats her, stealing her food and snapping at her legs. She permits it all graciously, like any Madonna with her babe. When this last survivor goes in his turn, Wolf gives no sign of bereavement. She falls back into her maiden routine, and lives happily until the love fever agitates her and the village again. Then she mates, breeds, and the cycle of life comes full turn once more. Is not this also the essence of human life? Take away the frills, and what greater significance than Wolf's has our own merry-go-round of births and deaths? Hidden away in the small type of our daily press, under the captions of births, marriages and deaths, is the essential history of mankind. Everything else is ornament. Looked at in this canine perspective, the sublime tale of Heloise and Abelard, or the lyric of Wimpole Street, are but incidents in nature's fanatical resolution to carry on. All this hunting of a man after a maid, all this anatomical display, this revealing concealment, these luring perfumes, these graceful movements, this stealthy scrutiny, this gynecological wit, these romances and dramas and films, all this money-making, tailoring, clothes brushing, preening, dancing, singing, tail-spreading, prattling, itching, all are part of the ritual of reproduction. The ceremony becomes more complex, but the end is as before. Unto them a little child is born. Once the child had an immortal soul, now it has glands. To the physicist it is only a bundle of molecules, or atoms, or electrons, or protons. To the physiologist it is an unstable conjunction of muscles and nerves. To the physician it is a red mass of illnesses and pains. To the psychologist it is a helpless mouthpiece of heredity and environment, a rabble of conditioned reflexes marshaled by hunger and love. Almost every idea this strange organism will have will a delusion, almost every perception will be a prejudice. It will rear fine theories of free will and immortal life, and, from hour to hour it will rot and rot. It will construct great systems of philosophy, in which the drop of water will explain the sea. The thought will seldom occur to this forked radish called man that it is just one species among a billion, a passing experiment of nature, who, as Turgenev said, entertains no preferences as between men and fleas. Only science gives us at last the gift which Robert Burns unwisely begged of the Xs, to see ourselves as others see us, even as other species see us. In the end we perceive that to the dog we are but irrational freighters, making much noise with the tongue, and that to the mosquito we are merely meals. Some of us reach the last stage of objectivity, and surrender our final prejudice, the judgment of beauty. We admit that something may be said for the Zulu's idolatry of Oedipus Nates, and that a Martian might conceivably admire, next to the beauty of collies and marais, the loveliness of woman. Slowly we cease to be the center and summit of the universe. We and our species, in the Wientific eye, are trivial fragments, flying off at a tangent towards destruction. For history, the 19th century was the age of history as well as of science. The hunger for facts turned with a concerted fury upon the past, dismembered and dissected it, and discovered the rise and fall of nations. The resultant picture is a panorama of development and decay. History, as Bacon said, is the planks of a shipwreck, and nothing seems certain in it except decadence, degeneration, and death. 1,000 varieties of man Piltdown, Neanderthal, Chellean, Acheulean, Mousterian, Aurignacian, Criernanon, Rhodesian, Pecan man lived for thousands of years, fought, thought, invented, painted, carved, made children, and left no more to posterity than a few flints and scratches, forgotten for millennia and found only by the picks and spades of our inquisitive day. 1,000 civilizations have disappeared under the ocean or the earth, leaving, like Atlantis, merely a legend behind. Turkestan, Mohenjo-Daro, Ur of the Chaldees, Samarkand of Tamerlane, Angkor of the Khmers, Yucatan of the Mayas, and the Incas Peru. These are the mausolea of cultures almost completely lost. They are among the few which we have unearthed. Calculate, then, the number of dead civilizations of which history preserves no vestige at all. And of the pitiful minority that have clung to some place in human memory, like Babylon and Egypt, Persia and Crete, Greece and Rome. Consider their grandeur and decadence, and see how uncertain a thing history is, how its greatest names are writ in water, and how even Shakespeare may become to his countrymen, within a century of his death, a half-forgotten barbarian given to melodramatic fustian and bad puns. All things, said Aristotle, have been discovered and forgotten many times over. Progress, he assures us, is a delusion. Human affairs are like the EA, which on its surface is disturxed into 1,000 motions, and seems to be headed somewhere, while at its TX, it is comparatively changeless and still. What we call progress is, perhaps, mere superficial change, a success scion of fashions in dress, government, psychology, religion, Christian Science, behaviorism, democracy. Automobiles and pants are not progress, they are change, they are new ways of doing old things, new errors in the vain attempt to understand eternal mysteries. Underneath these varying phenomena the essence remains the same. The man who uses the steam shovel and the electric drill, the tractor and the tank, the adding machine and the machine gun, the airplane and the bomb, is the same sort of man as those who used wooden plows, flint knives, log wheels, and arrows, not writing, and poisoned spearheads. The TCX, L differs, the end is the same, the scale is vaster, the purposes as crude and selfish, as stupid and contradictory, as murderous and suicidal, as in prehistoric or ancient days. Everything has progressed except man. All history, then, all the proud record of human accumulations and discoveries, seems at times to be a futile circle, a weary tragedy in which Sisyphus man repeatedly pushes invention and Lal and 3R up the high hill of civilization and culture, only to have the precarious structure again and again topple back into barbarism, into coolies, riots, fellaheen, mujiks, and serfs through the exhaustion of the soil, or the migrations of trade, or the vandalism of invaders, or the educated sterility of the race. So much remains of Condorcet's indefinite perfectibility of mankind. Indefinite indeed. Utopia, all the dogma that in the last 100 years gave to earthly life something of the significance which the hope of heaven brought to medieval man, seems to have lost countenance in this sceptical century. Progress, universal education, popular savoir is now so in doubt as to do them reverence. Our schools are like our inventions, they offer us new ideas, new means of doing old things, they elevate us from petty larceny to bank wreckages and teapot domes. They stake all on intellect, only to find that character wins in the end. We taught people how to read, and they enrich the tabloids and the talkies. We invented the radio, and they pour out, 100 times more abundantly than before, the music of savages and the prejudices of mobs. We gave them, through technology and engineering, unprecedented wealth, miraculous automobiles, luxurious travel, and spacious homes, only to find that departs as ricks come, that automobiles override immorally and connive at crime, that quarrels grow bitterer as the spoils increase, and that the largest houses are the battlegrounds of the ancient war between woman and man. We discovered birth control, and now it sterilizes the intelligent, multiplies the ignorant, debases love with promiscuity, frustrates the educator, empowers the demagogue, and deteriorates the race. We enfranchised all men, and find them supporting and preserving, in nearly every city, a nefarious machine that the road between ability and offs. We enfranchised all women, and discovered that nothing is changed except clerical expense. We dreamed of socialism, and find our own souls greedy to make it possible. In our hearts we are capitalists, and have no serious objection to becoming rich. We dreamed of emancipation through organized and find great unions working hand in hand with corrupt machines and murderous gangs. These are the instruments with which we intellectuals planned to build utopia. We turned at last to Russia, and find it conquering at the cost of that free dom of BCXLY in mind, of work, and thought, which has been the soul of liberalism and radicalism from Godwin to Darrow, from Emerson to Kropotkin, from Rabelais to Anatole France. And over all the drama hovers, like a many-armed Shiva, the Mary of war. The grandeur of Egypt is the child of brutal conquest and despotism, the glory of Greece is rooted in the mire of slavery, the majesty of Rome is in its triremes and its legions, the civilization of Europe rises and falls with its guns. History, like Napoleon's God, is on the side of Big Bertha, it laughs at artists and philosophers, destroys their work in a moment of patriotism, and gives its honors, its statues, and its pages to Mars. Egypt builds and Persia destroys it, Persia builds and Greece destroys it, Greece builds and Rome destroys it, Islam builds and Spain destroys it, Spain builds and England destroys it, Europe builds and Europe destroys it. Men kill one another at first with sticks and stones, then with arrows and lances, then with phalanxes and cohorts, then with cannon and musketry, then with dreadnoughts and submarines, then with tanks and planes. The scale and grandeur of construction and progress are equaled by the scale and terror of destruction and war. One by one the nations rear their heads in pride, and one by one war decapitates them. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair, reads the proud inscription on the ruined and desolate statue of Ozymandias, builder of buildings and king of kings, but the traveler reports, simply, nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare the lawn and level sands stretch far away. 6. The suicide of the intellect in the face of this impartial destructiveness of his Tory, this neutrality of nature between an evil, life and death, the soul of man, in the past, has strengthened itself with faith in a juster world to come. There all these wrongs would be righted, and the poor man in heaven would have the pleasure of letting a drop of water fall upon the rich man's tongue in hell. There was something furtious in the old faiths, the gentle gospels of Buddha and Christ were blackened by time into holy orgies of revenge, every paradise had its inferno, to which good people fervently consigned those who had succeeded too well in life, or had adopted the wrong myth. In those happy days men agreed that life was evil, Gautama called the extinction of individual consciousness the greatest good, and the Church described life as a vale of tears. Men could afford to be pessimists about the earth, because they were optimists about the sky. Behind those clouds they saw the isles of the blessed, the abysses of everlasting bliss. As I write a song comes up from the street below. A black garlaired lass, accompanied by a tremulous brass band, is singing the Rock of Ages. Silently I join in the refrain, and all the idealized memories of my pious youth surge up within me. I slip down and pass among the impromptu congregation that has gathered about the singers. The uniformed men in the Ishiel band do not impress me, without exception they are practical fellows. Long since, I fear, religion has become a business with them. The uniformed women, whose shrill voices carry the burden of the song, are pale and thin, empty in body and soul. Everything spiritual dies when it is sold, or made a motley to the view. But in the crowd itself the faces are not hard. These men seem for the most part destitute, jobless and penniless. The exploitation and poverty that are a part of life have fallen heavily upon them. They are one a moment in the eternal wastage of selection, yet they are not bitter. They listen patiently to the harangue of the preacher calling them violently to the gentle Christ. Despite his invectives and denunciations some of them seem comforted. For a while they catch a glimpse of another world than their daily round of unemployment and fruitless search, of burning hunger and weary feet. In a dark an old Warnan listens horrifully, sheds a tar, and mumbles a prayer. But for the most part the men smile incredulously, their poverty not seem to them to declare the glory of GD. When the song is renewed not one of them joins in it, one by one they walk quietly away. Even into these simple souls the scepticism of our time has entered. How shall I, fortunate and comfortable, ever fathom the despair of these men, shorn not only of the goods of life but of a consoling faith as well? For today science, which, because of its marvelous creations, they have learned to trust as once they trusted the priest, has told them that the sky which of old promised them happiness, is mcrc blue nothing, cold and empty space, and that those clouds among which the ankles frolicked are only the steaming perspiration of the earth. Science does not offer consolation, it offers death. Everything, from the unwinding universe of the astronomers to the college girl irradiating life with beauty and laughter, must pass away. This handsome youth, erect and vigorous, fresh from athletic victories, will be laid low tomorrow by some modest, ingratiating germ. This noble pianist, who has dignified his time with perfection, and has taught a million souls to forget themselves, and is already in the clutch of death, and will, within a decade, rotting in the tomb. The greatest question of our time is not communism versus individualism, not Europe versus America, not even the East versus the West, it is whether men can bear to live without God. Religion was profounder than philosophy, and refused to human happiness in the earth, it based man's hopes where knowledge could never reach them beyond the grave. Perhaps Asia was profounder than Europe, and medievalism profounder than modernity, for they kept at arm's length this science that seems to kill whatever it touches, reducing soul to brain, life to matter, personality to chemistry, and will to fate. Perhaps some confident and stoic race, still strong in religious enthusiasm, will engulf and absorb these disillusioned peoples of the West, so scientifically in love with death. This, then, is the final triumph of thought, that it disintegrates all sosictics, and at last destroys the thinker himself. Perhaps the invention of thought was one of the cardinal errors of mankind. For first, thought undermined morality by shearing it of its supernatural sanctions and sanctity, and revealing it as a utility designed to save policemen, and a morality without God is as weak as a traffic law when the policeman is on FTNT. Second, thought undermined society by separating sex from parentage, removing the penalty from promiscuity, and liberating the individual from the race. Now only the ignorant transmit their kind. Finally, it undermined the thinker by revealing to him, in astronomy and geology, biology, and history, a panorama which he saw himself as an insignificant fragment in space and a flickering moment in time. It took from him his belief in his own will and future, left his fate nude of nobility and grandeur, and weakened him into despondency and surrender. And here, in the macabre finale, philosophy joins hands with science in the work of destruction. That total perspective which it preached so proudly and so eagerly pursued is apparently the most dangerous though the rarest foe of resolution and joy, for what meaning or dignity can the individual have in a world so vast, among species without number, and in time without end? He that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow, and in much wisdom is much vanity. 7. This is the challenge which confronts our age, and dwarfs all other problems of philosophy and religion, and statesmanship. It the apparent ruin of our economic system becomes a transitory trifle unworthy of serious concern. If the reader has been disturbed by these pages, it is GCX.D. Let him now find in his own mental resources some basis for his faith. Let him honestly formulate his own reply to this philosophy of despair. For those of us who wish to live consciously, to know the worst and praise the best, must meet all these doubts if we are to maintain any longer our pretense to the life of reason. Chapter 11. Some contemporaries on meaning of life. Men of letters. The letter printed at the beginning of this sent, in the summer of 1931, to 100 or more of the brighter luminaries in Contimi, Rary Life and Thought. In each case the letter was accompanied by a request for permission to publish the reply. A considerable number of the addressed begged to excused from answering, lest they incriminate themselves. Public officials in particular were reluctant to speak frankly on so delicate a question, since their tenure of office depended, in some slight measure, on the will of the uninformed. I can readily forgive them. I confess that my letter involved intimate a scrutiny of private opinions for public lives, and I know the heavy price which must be paid in amiable hypocrisy for the privilege of holding office in a democratic state. Under the circumstances I was surprised by the abundance and candor of the replies. Our greatest novelist, Theodore Dreiser, immersed in the battles of the unemployed, wrote briefly, under date of June 23, 1931, Your letter of June 15 seems to me the best answer that can be made to your question, what is the meaning or worth of human life? If I had the time to undertake such a task as you suggest, My answer would really be some such diatribe as this letter of yours. From our leading critic, H. L. Mencken, the man who above all others has influenced contemporary American literature and thought, came this frank reply: "You ask me, in brief, what satisfaction I get out of life, and why I go on working. I go on working for the same reason that a hen goes on laying eggs. There is in every living creature an obscure but impulse to active functioning. Life demands to be lived. Inaction, save as a measure of recuperation between bursts of activity, is painful and dangerous to the healthy organism. In fact, it is almost impossible. Only the dying can really idle. The precise form of an individual's activity is determined, of course, by the equipment with which he came into the world. In other words, it is determined by his heredity. I do not lay eggs, as a hen does, because I was born without any acquirement for it. For the same reason I do not get myself elected to Congress, or play the violoncello, or teach metaphysics in a college, or work in a steel mill. What I do is simply what lies easiest to my hand. It happens that I was RN with an intense and insatiable interest in ideas, and thus like to play with them. It happens also that I was born with rather more than the average facility for putting them into words. In consequence, I am a writer and editor, which is to say, a dealer in them and concocter of them. There is very little conscious volition in all this. What I do was ordained by the inscrutable fates, not chosen by me. In my boics, yielding to a powerful but still subordinate interest in exact facts, I wanted to a chemist, and at the same time my father tried to make me a businessman. At other times, like any other relatively poor man, I have longed to make a lot of money by some easy swindle. But I became a writer all the same, and shall remain one until the end of the chapter, just as a cow gets on giving milk all her life, even though what appears to be her self-interest urges her to give gin. I am far luckier than most men, for I have been able since boyhood to make a good living doing precisely what I have wanted to do, what I would have done for nothing, and very gladly, if there had been no reward for it. Not many men, I believe, are so fortunate. Millions of them have to make their livings at tasks which really do not interest them. As for me, I have had an extraordinarily pleasant life, despite the fact that I have had the usual share of woes. For in the midst of those I still enjoyed the immense satisfaction which gets with free activity. I have done, in the main, exactly what I wanted to do. Its possible effects upon other people have interested me very little. I have not written and published to please other people, but to satisfy myself, just as a cow gives milk, not to profit the dairyman, but to satisfy herself. I like to think that most of my ideas have sound ones, but I really don't care. The world may take them or leave them. I have had my fun hatching them. Next to agreeable work as a means of attaining happiness, I put what Huxley called the domestic affections, the day-to-day intercourse with family and friends. My home has seen bitter sorrow, but it has never seen any serious disputes, and it has never seen I was completely happy with my mother and sister, and I am completely happy with my wife. Most of the men I commonly associate with are friends of very old standing. I have known some of them for more than 30 years. I seldom see anyone, intimately, whom I have known for less than 10 years. These friends delight me. I turn to them when work is done with unfailing eagerness. We have the same general tastes, and see the world much alike. Most of them are interested in music, as I am. It has given me more pleasure in this life than any other external thing. I love it more every year. As for religion, I am quite devoid of it. Never in my adult life have I anything that could be plausibly called a religious impulse. My father and grandfather were agnostics before me, and though I was sent to Sunday SCHCM, LSA and exposed to the Christian theology, I was never taught to believe it. My father thought that I should learn what it was, but it apparently never occurred to him that I would accept it. He was a Goxy psychologist. What I got in Sunday school beside a wide acquaintance with Christian hymnology was simply a firm conviction that the Christian faith was full of palpable absurdities, and the Christian G11 preposterous. Since that time I have read a great deal in theology, perhaps much more than the average clergyman, but I have never discovered any reason to change my mind. The act of worship, as carried on by Christians, seems to me to be debasing rather than ennobling. It involves groveling before a being who, if he really exists, deserves to be denounced instead of respected. I see little evidence in this world of the so-called GDX, Genus of God. On the contrary, it seems to me that, on the strength of his daily acts, he must be set down a most stupid, cruel, and villainous fellow. I can say this with a clear conscience, for he has treated me very well, in fact, with vast politeness. But I can't help thinking of his barbaric torture of most of the rest of humanity. I simply can't imagine revering the H of war and politics, theology, and cancer. I do not in immortality, and have no desire for it. The belief in it issues from the puerile egos of inferior men. In its Christian form it is little more than a device for getting revenge upon those who are having a better time on this earth. What the meaning of human life may be I don't know, I incline to susfct that it has none. All I know it is that, to me at least, it is very amusing while it lasts. Even its troubles, indeed, can be amusing. Moreover, they tend to foster the human qualities that I admire most, courage and its analogues. The noblest man, I think, is that one who fights genie, and triumphs over him. I have had little of this to do. When I die I shall be content to vanish into nothingness. No show, however good, could conceivably GDX, D forever. This is a delightful piece, which I print here with the uneasy conscience of a man stealing a gem. I trust Mr. Mencken will do MC the honor some day of appropriating something of mine, if he can find in me anything so honest and rankless as this auto-analysis of Mencken in terms of cows and hens. The man here revealed is a being more diverse and sensitive than the editor of the American Mercury. He is not afraid to love music in his home, and braves all the conventions of our literary world by getting along with his wife, though he was clever enough to marry at an age when monogamy is bearable. Perhaps because he fears and distrusts this secret sensitivity and tenderness in his nature, he clings to a hard, tough-minded philosophy of mechanism and determinism, and will confess no sympathy with the eternal hunger of mankind for supernatural consolations. It is doubtful if we shall find in all our batch of answers a reply so straightforward as this. Mr. Mencken is commonly rated and berated as ultimist, but it is evidently possible for a man to be a pessimist about the world and yet a tolerably cheerful fellow in his life. So with our most famous novelist, Sinclair Lewis. He has no very ingratiating opinion of us poor hipterites, and might be judged from his BTKs to be a man full of irony and gall, but his simple letter indicates how unnecessary it is to conclude from mechanism and atheism to sorrow and despair. It is, I think, an error to that there is any need of religion to make life seem worth living, or to give consolation in sorrow, except in the case of people who have been reared to religion so that, should they lose it in their adult years, they would miss it, their whole thinking having been conditioned by it. I know several young people who have been reared entirely without thought of churches, of formal theology, or any other aspect of religion, who have learned ethics not as a divine commandment but as a matter of social convenience. They seem to me quite as happy, quite as filled with purpose and with eagerness about life as any one trained to pass all his troubles on to the Lord, or the Lord's look-all agent, the pastor. Their satisfaction comes from functioning healthily, from physical and mental exercise, whether it be playing tennis or tackling an astronomical problem. Nor do believe that most of them will even in old age feel any need of religious consolation, because I know also a few old people who have thus reared all their lives and who are perfectly serene just to be living. A 74-year-old agnostic like Clarence C. Darrow is not less but more cheerful and excited life's adventure, yes, and spiritual-minded than an aged bishop whose bright hawks of heaven are often overbalanced by his fears of hell. If I go to a play I do not enjoy it less true. I do not believe that it is divinely created and divinely conducted, that it will last forever instead of stopping at 11, that many details of it will remain in my memory after a few months, or that it will have any particular moral effect upon me. And I enjoy life as I enjoy that play. If you wish to quote any of this, you may. Sincerely yours, Sinclair Lewis. All three of these replies take mechanism or materialism for granted. This is the secret base upon which the most characteristic achievements of contemporary literature are built. The philosophy of one age is the literature of the next. The novels and dramas of the work of Mann and Schnitzler, Gorky and Wells, Dreiser and Lewis, Toller and O'Neill are echoes of Darwin and Spencer, Nietzsche and Karl Marx. Shaw has moved up to and O'Neill has added Freud to Schopenhauer to the American Sophocles. Literature has not yet discovered that the science of 1932 seriously questions the philosophy of 1859. Eric inaccurately, not all our leading writers come under the banner of a Mechanist creed. John Erskine has some doubts which he expresses with characteristic urbanity and tolerance, June 29, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, it seems to that the human race has been given to two bad mistakes in its thinking. One is to forget that our spiritual life is just as natural as our physical. Whether or not the philosophers care to admit that we have a soul, it seems obvious that we are equipped with something or other which generates dreams and ideals, and which sets up values. My own disposition is to accept in its entirety this human nature which we are born to, without splitting many hairs as to whether that nature is dual or single. It is natural to me, and I assume for others as well, to imagine ultimate ends and to worship those ends as our God. It does not disturb me that man's conception of varies greatly at different times and in different places. Apparently that variation is a condition of our nature in this world. To think of life in these terms is, I suppose, to define religion as an art, as something which man will surely put forth out of himself, whether it emerges as Mohammedanism, or Catholicism, or as the present communism of Russia. If some of us are offended by the description of religion as an art, it is probably because they do not attach the importance which I do to art. I should like to use the word to cover all the ideal-making and ideal-expressing functions of our nature. If it is a mistake not to recognize that our spiritual life is as natural as our physical, it is another and probably a more common error to confuse our spiritual ideals with the actual facts of existence. If we were willing to follow our ideals as ends which we hope to achieve, we could then perhaps be gentle with our fellow man who has other ses. But an intense faith, if one can judge from history, often makes us stupidly literal. To say that life is an art would imply to some people that the description of human nature here given makes too little of the moral sense. I believe that the sanctions of morality are implicit in the human instinct to make of life a work of art. Though we sometimes speak of a primrose path, we all know that a bad life is just as difficult, just as full of obstacles and hardships, as a good one. We are told that the way is straight which leads to salvation. We are also told that the way of the transgressor is hard. The only choice is in the kind of life one would care to spend one's courts on. I believe the divine element in man is whatever it is which makes us wish to lead a life worth remembering, harmless to others, helpful to them, and increasing our own store of wisdom and peace. Faithfully yours, John Erskine. And Charles Beard, one of the soundest minds of our generation, writes with the uncertainty of a modest man dealing with infinites. New Milford, Con. June 25, 1931. My dear Will Durant, the question you propose is important, the most important that could be asked, and therefore difficult to answer, if not impossible. Still, it must be faced, and now that my shadows fall aslant to the east I am asking it with increasing anxiety. Long ago the Milton, I think it was, said that th comes to us first in hideous meaning that it disturbs our old delusions and assurances. Yet in time we become familiar with it and assimilate it to life as it must be lived. So we go on working even when some of our cherished ideals seem crushed to earth never to rise again. Why? We do not know. We can only guess. One answer is that we are driven by the biological force within us, by the necessity of earning a living, and discharging the obligations which we have gathered on the way. But that is not enough. Thousands go on working after they have secured an abundance of the GCXXL things men prize. Others keep on working, as did William Lloyd Garrison, amid the gathering gloom of apparent defeat. When we analyze ourselves, we find conflicting motives. We have moments of shivering selfishness, when we think only of our personal gain. And we have moments of exaltation when we feel the thrill of the prodigious and hear the call to high action. That seems to be true of all men and women, high and low, and the outcome in each case is a matter of proportion. For myself, I may say that as I look over the grand drama of history, I find, or seem to find, amid the apparent chaos and tragedy, evidence of law and plan and immense achievement of the human spirit in spite of disasters. I am convinced that the world is not a mere bog in which men and women trample themselves in the mire and die. Something magnificent is taking place here amid the cruelties and tragedies, and the supreme challenge to intelligence is that of making the noblest interest in our curious heritage prevail. If there was no grand design in the beginning of the universe, fragments of one are evident and mankind can complete the picture. A knowledge of the good life is our certain philosophic heritage, and technology has given us a power over nature which enables us to provide the conditions of the GCXYD life for all the Earth's multitudes. That seems to me to the most engaging possibility of the drama, and faith in it keeps me working at it even in the worst hours of disillusionment. The life an end in itself to be loved and enjoyed, an intelligent labor directed to the task of making GCXXL life prevail. There is the little philosophy, the circle of thought, within which I keep my little mill turning. This is the appearance of things as I see them, and even profound philosophers can merely say what they find here. Sincerely yours, Charles A. Beard. The clearest expression of the idealism that lurks in the literary soul behind the mask came from John Cow Fr. Powys, who is, I should say, the profoundest and subtlest and noblest genius whom I have. Hillsdale, N.Y., July R. 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, the collapse of organized and the absence, from the organized of the world, of any essential liberty or culture, throws the individual back upon himself. For himself and in himself HC can rediscover the secrets of faith, of horror, of happiness. The most magical powers, values, sensations of these secrets of life are still to found in nature, and can be enjoyed by the weak quite as much as by the strong. The fresh water springs of a mystical personal life are entirely beyond the power of the passing fashions of thought to destroy, and they can exist under any system of political and economic organization or disorganization. Nature is friendly to the weak as well as to the strong, and truth does not lie in rational generalizations of laws and methods, but in an instinctive growth, implying a hardly won and hardly kept organic of delicate adjustments between the individual consciousness and nature. Personal experience of the mystery of nature and the mystery of life brings back faith in the freedom of the will, faith in the powers of the soul, faith in the mystical interpretations of existence. No rational fashions of the passing hour have the least importance when it is a question of the individual consciousness adapting itself to nature, finding its own work, its own beauty, its own truth, its own righteousness, its own happiness, and treating everything else with ironic defense and indulgence. In opposition to the scientific attitude to nature, the individual self must resort to the arsenal attitude and practice what Spengler, interpreting Goethe, calls the physiognomic vision, a vision, namely, that carries a fresh and childlike admiration of natural phenomena, as well as a wary and peasant-like suspicion of all generalizations and explanations. To restore to one's individual life a certain secret liberty of thought and feeling, that shall be at once reverential and sceptical, to free the fresh water springs of one's happiness from dependence upon outward conditions while one twists outward conditions as craftily as possible to the demands of the flesh and the spirit, to compromise in unessentials while one clings to essentials with the fluid obstinacy of water seeking its level, to retain an open mind with regard to the magical, while one exploits in their place and under their limitations, the rational interpretations of nature and life, to free oneself from the morbidities of sympathy as well as from the cruelties of selfishness, to treat the whole spectacle ultimately as a dream within a dream, from which it still remains possible that death may awaken us, to have no convictions except the conviction that all cruelty is evil and that all lives are holy and sacred. Thus it seems to me one may reduce the astronomical universe to its due place of secondary importance compared with the concentration upon the mystery of consciousness wherein lies that earnestness that alone makes life eternity. John Cooper Powys the poet. And Powys is a poet by the compulsion of his be expected to accept the harsh decrees of a materialistic philosophy. He is normally tender-minded, and even when he flaunts his atheism, like a college athlete's letter to the world, he is apt to go on singing hymns even to the gods whom he denies, as Swinburne did, or Shelley, or Keats. For poetry dies at the touch of the mechanical, and flourishes on the theme of life and growth. It is pledged almost from the start to a spiritual interpretation of the world. Hear the vigorous rejection of mechanism by our greatest American Peterborough, NH September 18, 1931. Dear Dr. Durant, I have delayed my acknowledgement of your letter only for the lack of anything as officially profound or valuable to say in reply to it. I told a philosopher once that all the other philosophers would have to go out of business if one of them should happen to discover the truth, and now you say, or imply, in your letter that the truth has been discovered, and that we are only the worse off, if possible, for the discovery. This is naturally a cause of some chagrin and humiliation for me, for I had heard nothing about it. It is true that we have acquired a great deal of material knowledge in recent years, but so far as knowledge of the truth itself is concerned, I cannot see that we are any nearer to it now than our less imaginative ancestors were when they cracked each other's skulls with stone hatchets, or that we know any more than they knew of what happened to the soul that escaped in the process. It is easy, and just now rather fashionable, to say that there is no soul, but we do not know whether there is a soul or not. If a man is a materialist, or a mechanist, or whatever he likes to call himself, I can see for him no escape from belief in a futility so prolonged and complicated and diabolical and preposterous as to be worse than absurd, and as I do not know that such a tragic absurdity is not a fact, I can only know my native inability to believe that it is one. There is nothing in the thought of annihilation that frightens me, for it would be, at the worst, nothing more terrible than going to sleep at the end of a long day, whether a pleasant or a painful one, or both. But if life is what it appears to be, no amount of improvement or enlightenment will ever compensate or atone for what it has inflicted and endured in ages past, or for what it is inflicting and enduring today. There is apparently not much that anyone can do about it except to follow his own light, which may or may not the light of an ignis fatuus in a swamp. The coxurknks of the modern mechanist means nothing to me, and I doubt if it means any more to him when he pauses really to think. His position is not entirely unlike that of an intrepid explorer standing on a promontory in a fog, looking through the newest thing in thc way of glasses for an that he cannot see, and shouting to his mechanistic friends behind him that he has found the end of the world. These remarks, which to some readers might seem a little severe, are more the result of observation and reflection than of personal discomfort or dissatisfaction. As lives go, my own life would be called, and properly, a rather fortunate one. Yours very truly, Edwin Arlington Robinson. But all these replies are from Americans. I pass at once to a reply from France, a contribution of the first order, and unstintedly generous. The author of Ariel, Byron, and Disraeli wrote as follows, but in impeccable French: Neuilly sur Indie, August 21, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, pardon me for replying so tardily to your letter. The excuses are two: first, that I have been away from Paris, and your inquiry therefore took a long time reaching me; second, that I found the problem so interesting that I have written an entire essay in answer. I am sending it to you, and naturally I authorize you to publish a part of this should it seem desirable to you. I shall publish it myself, doubtless, in some future volume of essays. Very sincerely, André Maurois. The essay which M. Maurois composed for our little is a gem worthy of Voltaire or Anatole France. He describes a successful rocket flight of a group of Englishmen and Englishwomen to the arrived there they fail to construct, as they had planned, a rocket to return to, or communicate with, the earth, and they are compelled to make the moon their home. 10 years pass. Meanwhile all these English ladies and gentlemen continued to conduct themselves as if they were in England. The Governor, Sir Charles Solomon, and Lady Solomon dressed every evening for dinner. On the king's birthday Sir Charles gave a toast to His Majesty, and all the lunar colonists murmured the king. It was a moving 200 years pass, and still no word of an _turquoise with the earth. The seventh generation finds it difficult to believe any longer in that distant king, always invisible and always silent, of whom their credulous elders have transmitted to them a vague tradition. A group of impious students arise who flatly deny the existence of this King of Great Britain and Ireland, Emperor of the Indies, and Protector of the Moon, in whose name all laws are promulgated and in whom all morals have had their solemn sanction. To which the conservatives reply irritably, "Take cark, if you empty the earth of our king, and of the legendary Englishmen who have bequeathed us our traditions, you will make lunary life very difficult. For what then will be for you the meaning of this life? What will be the sources of your energy? By what treasure will you live?" In the end the radicals prevail. It is a period of melancholy and romantic despair of the young men of the experiments in sexual liberty produce a great disorder of mind and soul. Boredom follows liberty, and revolt follows boredom. People are discontent, men are troubled, and literature is excellent. A great philosopher appears who, in lyric prose, chides the disillusionment of his time. Why, he asks, search for the meaning of life outside of life itself? The king of whom our legends speak, does he exist? I do not know, and it does not matter. I know that the mountains of the RNCX, and are beautiful when the crescent of the Karth illuminates them. If the king remains, as always since my birth, invisible and silent, I shall doubt his reality, but I shall not doubt life, or the beauty of the moment, or the happiness of action. Sophists teach you today that life is only a brief moment in the trajectory of a star. They tell you that nothing is certain except defeat and death. As for me, I tell you that nothing exists except victory and life. What shall we know of our death? Either the soul is immortal and we shall not die, or it perishes with the flesh and we shall not know that we are dead. Live, then, as if you were eternal, and do not believe that your life is changed merely because it seems proved that the earth is empty. You do not live in the earth, you live in yourself. Yes, Morois tells himself, this story would be a possible answer to the American Inquirer. But, not quite satisfied with it, he casts for another world for his thought. He sees two lines of ants crawling over a path in the park, one going from the ant heap, the other returning to it, both engaged in some public utility. And he imagines a philosophic ant, with agitated antenna, stopping one of the columns with sage discourse. My sisters, you have believed, and I have believed with you, that the world of ants was the only important world, that the great ant watched over it, and that devotion to the ant heap was a sentiment so lofty and noble as to justify all our toil and our suffering. Certainly it is hard to transport, with never a moment of rest, across these immense and perilous deserts, these bits of straw and these dead insects. It is heroic to brave the water, the landslides, birds that devour us, and these enormous forked masses which loom up in the sky in their rhythmic advance and crush hundreds of ants. This heroism, I used to believe, is easy when one devotes one's self to the greater glory of the ant heap. But alas, my sisters, I have studied and reflected, and behold what I have learned. Our ant heap, which we thought the center of the universe and the object of particular attention from the great ant, resembles 1,000 ant heaps, each of which is inhabited by thousands of ants, each of which thinks that his city is the navel of the world. You are astonished? But this is nothing yet. Though the ants form a race so vast that one could never number them, they are, nevertheless, only one race among thousands of races, one form among the infinitely many forms of life. You protest, dear ants? But there is more. Not only is the ant merely one form among forms, it is, though it costs my pride much to say it, one of the feeblest and most contemptible of forms. These forked monsters who crush us in the sand think it a humiliation to say to themselves, we, in the sight of GCXL, are no more than the ants. You threaten me? You are indignant? Ah, dear ants, you may well pardon these monsters, for they are deceived by their pride even in the moment of their humility. this earth of which they think themselves masters is but a drop of mud, and the duration of their race is but an instant in eternity. This, my sisters, is what I have learned in observing men, the movements of the sand, and the courses of THC stars. Having seen that all is vanity, I say to you, why work? Why these bits of sand, these corpses of butterflies? Why traverse these dangerous deserts in long and toiling processions? What will be the fruit of your labor on this earth? You will raise another generation of ants which in its turn will labor, suffer, and be crushed by the large feet of men. And these ants in turn will bring up other ants, even to that time infinitely far and infinitely near when the earth will be only a dead world. Therefore I say to you, stop, cease from this useless slavery, be no longer know that there is no great ant above us, that progress is an illusion, that your desire to toil is but the result of heredity, that nothing is certain on the earth except the defeat and death of the ants asleep from which there is no awakening. But a young ant politely pushes the sage ant aside. This is all very well, sister, he says, but we must build our tunnel. And Morois again concludes, this story T.K. would be a possible reply to the American philosopher. Science, he says, teaches that the life of our societies is only a pullulation of human insects on the earth, a planetary moss or mold. But does not the insect itself wish to live? Does not even the mold persevere in its being? And is it true that science destroys the faith of man in himself? What has science done, if not to give man powerful formulae for the transformation of his world? Man was a mold before science as well as after it. Science has done nothing except to make this human mold master of the earth. The Amkirkan philosopher will reply, what has been changed is this, that before science came this human moss did not know itself as moss, these insects did not know that they were only insects. They early lived in THC high dignity of man. Devils, angels, and gods, always hovering over them, dictate their actions. Hoi of a future life made them forget THC sorrows of earthly existence. Rights and laws, supported by a supernatural authority, saved men from anguish and doubt. But what gods lend to law today the force of their name? Osiris replaced the god of the treasure, Jupiter Osiris, Jehovah replaced Jupiter. But can the name of Einstein or Eddington serve to impose limits upon human desire? A light wind made the shadows of the roller blinds tremble on the white walls. It is true, I thought, that man cannot live without rules. But an instinct preserves him from such a calamity, as his own web of law and morals is torn from him, instinct weaves another to protect him. Sometimes it makes such a web out of the commandments of God, sometimes out of the counsels of science, sometimes out of the decrees of an earthly king. What difference does it make? Suppress if we will, like our Englishmen in the moon, the reality of the symbol, do the laws become less wise than erefore? Shall we not end by accepting these laws as necessary, though changing, conventions? Shall we not confess, at last, that every proposition which beyond human experience is uncertain? We know only that we do not know. Is this so terribly confession? Is it a new idea, and did Socrates never utter it? Twilight came. Already THC innkeeper, in SUS Penders, brought out his chair to the sidewalk. Lights appeared in the windows of the townsfolk, shining full tables. What is my secret trees here? I asked myself. This horror of a doctrine, this love of action, behind the RCKFS, suddenly grown dark, a milky clearness ran across the sky. The moon rose. Let us pause here for a while. It would not do to spoil this fine bit of philosophical imagination with any laser note. From To the Ganges, Beverly Hills, California. Dear Bill Durant. Am I DC late? If I thought of something, course I haven't thought of anything along the philosophy line yet, but you can never tell what queer things a man might think of during this depression. They say hunger produces the urge that's in a man, so if this keeps up, something awful GCXXL ought to come out of some of us. I had a little junk in a weekly article, that I already sold once and should give you most of the check for you furnished the idea, if there was anything in there any good to you take it, For a Sunday syndicated article is known to never read, and if so it's by somebody that can't remember 24 hours. There was 1 or 2 lines in there that might have been cuckoo enough to have been called philosoph. Why, when you come out this way, I want to see you and have a chat with you, have you visit me, you would see a curio around these movie lots, they got a great slant on life, well good luck to you, there seems to no way to keep people from writing back, KS, yours, WNL. RCX3ERs. I have been stealing much first-class material from first-rate men who answered my query as to the meaning of life, and the possible destruction of human hope by human knowledge, that I am comforted in my larceny by observing with what sly alchemy the philosopher of Beverly Hills turns my lead into gold. But hiring the better thief of the two, I pro EX, SE to snatch from Will's article, with acknowledgments to the New York American, a bit or two of his genial thought. Guess I just get the usual amount of mail of anyone that writes junk for the papers, mostly people that don't agree with anything you said in the papers, and showing you where you ought to be calling hogs somewhere. But this week I got some interesting letters. One I sure was surprised to get was from Will Durant, a man that has studied philosophy like Mr. Coolidge has politics, and both have reached the height in their chosen professions. He wanted me to write him and give him my version of what your philosophy of life is. I think what he is trying to get at in plain words, leaving all the philosophy out, is just how much better off after all is an highly educated man than a dumb one. So that's how I figure is the way I got in that list. He knew that I was just as happy and contented as if I knew something, and he wanted to get the dumb angle, as well as the highbrow. That education is sorter like a growing town. They get all excited when they start to get an increase, and they set a civic slogan of 50,000 by the end of next year. Well, that's the guy that sets a college education his goal. Then when they get the 50,000 they want to go on to make it 100. And the educated guy? He is the same. He finds when he gets his graduate course that all the other professors have got 1, 2, and lots of a half dozen. He begins to wonder if he hasn't spent all this time wondering if he knows anything or not. He wishes he had took up some other line. He talks with an old, broad-minded man of the world of experience, and he feels lost. So I guess he gets to wondering what education really is, after all. For there is nothing so stupid as an educated man, if you get off the thing that he was educated in. The whole thing is a racket, so get a few laughs, do the you can, take nothing serious, for nothing is certainly depending on this generation. Each one lives in spite of the previous one and not looks cause of it. And don't start seeking knowledge, for the more you seek the nearer the booby hatch you get. And don't have an ideal to work for. That's like hitting towards mirage of a lake. When you get here it ain't there. Believe in something for another world, but don't be too set on what it is, and then you won't start out that life with a disappointment. Live your life so that whenever you lose, you are ahead. We need Will Rogers' good cheer here, for the next reply to our letter is from Dr. Charles H. Mayo of Minnesota, the most famous of American surgeons, who says very briefly, Rochester, Minnesota, July 11, 1931. My dear Mr. Durant, I think you have summed up in an entrancing way the life of man on earth up to THC present. Am so busy with my work and there seems always to more rather than less that I do not find time to write. However, I shall be delighted to read what you write on the subject and shall for some advice as to how we can raise above human insects. With all wishes, sincerely yours, Charles H. Mayo, and a pessimism quite as profound marks the beautifully written response of Osip Gabrilowitsch, Gracchus aristocrat of the piano, who has so often lifted me out of my little self into that mystic, keen of reality which only music reveals. Orchestra Hall, Detroit, Michigan, August 21, 1931. My dear Mr. Durant, on my return from a trip abroad I had the pleasant surprise of finding your letter awaiting me. I sincerely wish I could send the reply you desire, inspired by hopeful, constructive convictions. In all honesty, however, I cannot do this. As I study the march of the human race through the centuries and try to understand its present status, I am unable to discern any plan leading to a higher fruition here or elsewhere. Cruelty, injustice, lawlessness seem to characterize the nature and actions of man today as much, though possibly in a different form, as they did thousands of years ago. A glance at the unprecedented social and economic which prevails in the world at present teaches us this lesson. It is but the inevitable result of our incurable inability or unwillingness to learn by experience, our lack of generosity, our lack of moral courage, all things as characteristic of the human race today as centuries ago. Yet love and beauty do exist, and humanity is not without ideals, even if the latter are sacrificed every day, nay every hour, in the foolish quest after matery all things. One of the questions in your letter to me was, tell us where you find your consolation and your happiness, work in the last resort your tricks erklicks. My personal happiness I find in two things: art and my family. But will future generations still in possession of these treasures? That is the question. The beauty of art, as understand beauty, is being systematically destroyed before our eyes, and cheap sensationalism substituted. Those who would be the prophets of a new art preach to us that beauty is no longer necessarily art's prime object. As for the future of the family, your letter expresses serious apprehension, and I fully share it. The dawn of an industrial revolution has arisen in the East, and if it should sweep the world it may destroy the home, as it has annihilated so many things which heretofore we thought indestructible. This, my dear Mr. Durant, is not a satisfactory reply to your query. Such thoughts, I know, cannot be of any aid to you or your readers, and I shall understand it if you mock no public USC of this letter. In fact, I would much prefer not to have you publish it. It could only lead to misunderstanding. People narrowly are unable to comprehend anyone's pessimistic philosophy without suspecting him of a personal quarrel with fate. Even a great thinker like Schopenhauer did not escape the accusation. How could I? Yet I personally have no complaint to make. I have fared well at the hands of destiny. I have always believed, and I still do, that a man's philosophy of life should be founded not on individual experience but on wide and unbiased observation. We all have eyes to see and ears to hear. The opportunity is given us of watching hundreds of lives besides our own. Should anyone be so narrow as to judge the world by what happens to be his personal fortune or ill luck? Because I eat 3 meals a day, does it follow that there is no starvation anywhere? Because some of us enjoy health, must we remain blind to the fact that thousands of humans daily endure the agony of suffering? Sincerely yours, Osip Gabrilowitsk. This is a fresh breath of honesty from a soul as sensitive as only a musician can. A different sort of honesty, bluff and rough like an Arctic wind, is in the reply of Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who knows life from pole to pole. June 16, 1931. Dear Durant, you ask the expression of a series of personal opinions. What help, if any, does religion give in life? Since the days when I studied religions and philosophy at the Harvard Divinity School, I have given thought to this, but perhaps observation is more. I have found that religious persons consider themselves better off than if they were irreligious, and that irreligious persons consider themselves better off than if they were religious. I have formed no conviction as to which, if thither, is right. Personally, I never felt inclined to take either religion or hall in the hope of drowning sorrow. What keeps me going? I suppose it is FCYXL, or perhaps rather fuel. For we are essentially heat engines that run according to the quantity and quality of the fuel till some part of the machine gives way. \VHAT are the sources of my inspiration. Again, FCOD, and the way the handles it. For instance, 2 years ago I lived a year in and around New York on exclusively meat and water. During that time I was noticeably more optimistic, LCX, carried forward to next day and next year with more relish than when on the ordinary mixed diet. Other sources of inspiration are weather, sound sleep. But perhaps, being a philosopher, you want to insist on spiritual inspirations. The fark such. My chief one is the feeling that if anything is worthwhile it may be the increase and diffusion of knowledge. So I keep working away at that when convenient. It is not clear that absorbing knowledge from universities and Sunday supplements has taken away from me any more than it has given in return. If no one has found a meaning for life, neither has anyone demonstrated that life has no meaning. What probably is meaningless is the question as to whether life has a meaning. Villoy Almer Stephenson, some answers were lazy, and referred me to the writers XJKS, Arthur Schnitzler, shortly before his death, sent on a whole book der Sprüche und Bedenken as his reply. Wells wearily pointed to all his books as his attempt to meet the issue. Eugene O'Neill wrote that he had tried to face the problem in his trilogy, Morning Becomes Electra, and Havelok Ellis wrote, London, June 18, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, the questions you propounded are, of course, the most irreverent that can be asked. All those of us who are really alive spend our lives in answering them and in expressing these answers in our work, whatever shape that work may take. If you ask me for the briefest and most leisurely statement of my own answers, I would without hesitation name The Dance of Life, slowly written during the most mature years of my life. I would add, as dealing with the same question though in a way more intimately personal and more fragmentary, the 3 series of my impressions and comments, now collected in one volume under the title of Fountain of Life. Sincerely yours, Havelock Ellis. Henry Fairfield Osborn, of the American Museum of Natural History, wrote that his life was too crowded to permit of his discussing its meaning, but he added that lines of research which I am now carrying on convince me that we must restore the word creative to the word evolution, as distinguished from the old world, created, and named these researches as the central significance and spiritual basis of his life. Admiral Byrd seems to have struggled heroically with the question, and then given it up as worse than the percenteth pole. A first response said, I am interested in your letter. Undoubtedly the truth is bringing pessimism and despair to many who think. I have given the very problem you bring up a great deal of thought. It isn't impossible that unless some constructive thought is given to the world, despair will do great damage. But meanwhile the man who made short work of geographic mysteries which centuries had failed to solve was caught in the lure of action and pleaded, in a later letter, the inadequacy of time. It was as if life would teach, by this very example, that action is healthier than thought. Solvitur ambulando, even philosophical questions can be answered only by doing things. All thought that does not lead to action, said Goethe, is a disease. Here is another man of action, Carl Laemmle, submerged in the chaos and speed of a motion picture studio, a man who must deal in action in order to make his pictures live. It would interesting to know how such a mind faces our problem. Carl Laemmle faces it with the simplicity and candor of a modest July 1, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, enjoyed your letter, and I am glad to answer your questions, but I am sorry to say I am going to disappoint you because my answers, while truthful, will be utterly bromidic. At least that is how I fear they will impress a mind like yours. If science and philosophy have brought us to the dreadful pass you describe in your letter, it doesn't speak very well for too much thought, does it? In my experience, I have found that most of the people I consider slightly off their base are merely victims of much introspection. You ask me what keeps me going. My answer is the answer which all smart Alecs laugh at. It is work. I get a tremendous kick out of seeing my ideas take form and bring concrete results. The fact that countless ideas do not work out does not take away from the pleasure I derive from those that do. I like the feel of power. You see, I am being as frank as I know how, and I like to make a money profit on my work. But the thing that keeps me going is the work itself and the sense of achievement. I cannot play as much as some men do because my eyes are not very good and my hearing is not of the best. So my play consists of a small game of poker with congenial friends, or perhaps a small bet on a horse race. As for religion, I do not know how much help it gives me. Very likely it helps me unconsciously, and it certainly must have had something to do with the formation of my ideals. Probably, it has much to do with my energy, although I have no tangible proof of it unless you consider one occasion when I was given up for dead and something pulled me through. My children, my one grandchild, my other relatives and my friends are my consolations and my happiness. You ask where in the last resort my treasure lies. I think it lies in an almost frenzied desire to see my children and my children's children well cared for and happy. Wonder if you had your tongue in your cheek when you said, "We are driven to conclude that the greatest mistake in human history was the discovery of the truth." When was this discovery made? I have not seen any headlines about it in the daily papers. I have supposed that each individual among us was still hoping to mock the discovery in his own way, and that this hope constituted a large part of his life, whether HC was aware of it or not. The truth which different men think they have discovered is probably not the truth at all, and that is why it has not made us free. I still have my delusions, thank God, and I feel sorry for the scientists and philosophers who have thought themselves into a deep pit. One of the things I am most grateful for is the fact that through a life of hard work, of one manacking crisis after another, of one disappointment and one triumph after another, I still remain an optimist. I do not know just what my main goal is other than what I have described, but I know I would have no goal at all if I were not an optimist. Would rather remain a hard-working businessman and be as happy as I am than become the world's greatest sage and accept all the sourness and hopelessness which seem to go with much abstract thinking. Sincerely yours, Carl Lemley. This is how the problem works out in life. We are too busy living to bother much. Ultimate meanings. The obligation to get work done puts a closure on thought. The man with a family to feed has no time for conscious philosophy. If he had, he might say that the meaning of life was to feed one's family, and it would be hard to better that answer. And now look at the problem through the eyes of the president of Dartmouth College, a man of the highest repute among those who know his field. Here again we shall find a healthy distrust of thinking divorced from life. June 30, 1931. Dear Mr. Durant, have read your letter of June 16 with great care and have with much seriousness considered the questions which you ask. I don't know that in the haste of the post-commencement season I can give you any statement that will helpful to you or that will be a sufficiently lucid expression to indicate what I really feel. However, here is my attempt to do what you have asked me to do. The worth of human life seems to me to be in the opportunity it offers to. I cannot imagine anyone's questioning the worthwhileness of life, for instance, if an occasional day like this is available to him. Great expanses of blue sky, lazily drifting recessi clouds, a perfect temperature, a cloth of verdure in trees and shrubs and lawns, the glorious colors of the gardens, and the sounds I heard at daybreak of all sorts of singing birds. These are all experiences beyond measure of value, but all sufficient, it seems to me, to give to any normal mind a sentiment that it is a glorious privilege to be alive. Neither scientific analysis nor a multitude of words will describe the reason for the pleasure in the note of a violin string or the song of the white-throated sparrow, but these are not less real because they cannot be analyzed, diagnosed, and explained. For me, therefore, being, with its concomitants of abilities to feel, to think, and to do, is an inestimable BTXJ, and that life offers and not simply a justification for it to be endured. The whole modern civilized world of that's fallen subject to the fallacy that truth is an end in itself rather than that it is simply a means to an end. The approach to fullness of life is along the way of truth, but the path is not the destination. The enduring value of religion is in its challenge to aspiration and hope in the mind of man. The barrenness of much called philosophy is in its tendency to become dialectic, and to ascribe values to words which at best are inaccurate representations of thought without regard to the value of feelings. Feelings are not necessarily untrue because they cannot be expressed. Every great religious leader has in one way or another declared in substance what Jesus said, that he was come to give life, and to give it more abundantly. The philosopher has given no such assurance. Not infrequently has committed himself to an intellectualism sterile of any emotional urge and denying any sufficient goal toward which life might press. The incapacity of philosophy to reign and rule seems to me to have been its obliviousness to human experience. It has herein failed to check the validity of its intellectual processes. Plato in his familiar passage on philosophers and kings long ago indicated the insufficiency of either thinking or doing.